This is episode 349 of That Shakespeare Life. Just like the work of William Shakespeare, That Shakespeare Life is supported by our patrons. Listeners just like you can support the work we do here and access special insider extras, including the chance to participate in the making of our show. Learn more at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and stay tuned for even more details.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald with the School of Irish, Celtic Studies and Folklore and University College Dublin in Ireland. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
It sounds really terrible. This cup with this wine-soaked, soggy piece of bread in the bottom, and that was supposed to be a real treat.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
A drink as much as it was songs and a group activity, Wassail has been a traditional part of the Christmas season in England and a particular favorite of Twelfth Night celebrations for centuries, including before, during, and after the life of William Shakespeare. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, Lady Macbeth talks about wine and wassail going together to muddle up the brain. Falstaff mentions a wassail candle in Henry IV, Part 2, and 3 other references in Shakespeare's plays refer to wassail as something that happened at night and existed somewhere between a greeting and something that could lead to trouble. Here today to share with us the songs from Shakespeare's lifetime that were considered wassail songs, as well as to help us unravel the complicated history of what it meant to go wassailing from house to house and how that related to the Christmas season and even to apple trees. Please welcome our guest and musical historian, Debi Simons. Debi Simons is a music historian, writer, and member of Colorado's Cherry Creek Chorale. She uses her teaching techniques and music background to compile literary and historical backgrounds for musical texts. On her website, debisimons.com, she has collected hundreds of posts and a dozen short books going behind the music to explore and translate some of history's greatest music pieces. She is the translator of Carl Orff's Carmina Burana, among several others. Learn more about Debi and find links to her work in the show notes for today's episode. Before we get into our conversation today, I want to let you know that there is coordinating visual history content that goes along with our conversation today, including museum artifacts, photos, research documents, period paintings, woodcuts, and so much more, all about wassailing, the drink, the music, and the cultural practice, all available as bonus content for patrons of our show. On the regular show notes page, you can select the Patreon button to sign up to be a patron or log in if you're already a supporter of our show, and all the extra content will open right there on the page so you can see the history we're talking about while you listen. For this week, the URL for where to find these extras is CassidyCash.com/episode 349. Again, that's CassidyCash.com/EP349. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Debi. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, I am so happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be able to share the interesting background about these songs that we sing all the time and we never think about their meaning.
100% with your background in exploring the music. And I love your website and how you go, every song has a story. I love that. And we are excited to learn about what the story is with wassail. So tell us about this word. What does wassail actually mean? And did it have the same definition that it does today when Shakespeare would have been wassailing in 16th and 17th century England?
Yes, it would have had the same meaning for the bard. And it comes from an Anglo-Saxon expression. I am not too sure that I'm using the correct terminology, the correct pronunciation, but it's something like Wes who hail. And hail, Hael, of course, you can see right away That's the same as our word hale, Hale. It means healthy. We talk about someone being hale and hearty. So this expression means, may you be well. It's an expression of good cheer, of greeting. And then it got associated with being offered a drink, what we would call a toast. So that's kind of the original meaning of it. And we can get into why on earth do we call it a toast? There's a very, very weird backstory about that. But that's kind of the origin, Old Norse, that morphs and morphs. And today when people say wassail, they're usually referring to the drink. But the drink only came later.
I think I am wondering why it's associated with a toast. Tell us about how this comes up. And specifically, I want to throw in there, I've looked up recipes for wassail, the drink, and some of them include bread, while others of them do not. So share with us whether or not the word toast is associated with adding bread into this drink.
It exactly is. And I recommended it. This will show up in the show notes, a video by a man named Max Miller, who does a lovely series called Tasting History. And he actually makes wassail with toast. So somehow this custom of dipping bread into a drink came about. And in fact, there was a very old tradition in, say, medieval banquets of you had a communal wine cup, or it might be a wassail cup. Wassail is not just associated with Christmas, although because of the customs around it, it became more and more associated with it. So you would dip this bread or this toast into the cup, and then everybody would pass it around and drink from it. And then the honoree, the guest of honor, would get, it sounds really terrible, this cup with this wine-soaked, soggy piece of bread in the bottom. And that was supposed to be a real treat. Now, to us, it is totally weird. So what Mr. Miller does in his video, and I'd never seen this before, and to me, it made it so much clearer. You know, we've all heard this term, but he got to the bottom of the bowl and he said, now I'm going to try this toast. And he's trying to fish it out like with a fork or a spoon, and it's all falling apart. And he manages to get a piece out and he tastes it and he says, this is awful. So I don't know. I think it was more the symbolism of the whole thing. And if we're talking about Shakespeare's time, by the way, just to throw in a little cultural reference from the 1600s, if your guests, your listeners would be familiar with the King James Bible and their passage in the Last Supper when Jesus and his disciples are sitting around the table. And there's this very strange line. It said, Jesus says, all of the disciples are saying, who's going to betray you? Who's going to betray you? And he says, he it is to whom I shall pass the sop. And you think, sop? What is that? Well, it's the soppy bread. It's, in other words, he's saying, normally I would pass this to the guest of honor, but I am passing it to the person who is the betrayer. And I grew up in churches that used the King James Bible, and then never for one moment occurred to me what the sop was. So the sop, the toast, and the nearest modern equivalent of this, by the way, I know we're getting kind of off the subject of wassail itself, but just to give, again, the listeners a modern idea, what do you do with French onion soup? Typically, you put bread.
Yes, because no, it does. It sounds really, really nasty. And we love Max Miller around here. He's a friend of our show and his episodes are fantastic. But I also have an episode for Wassail drink that I share every Christmas. It's one of my favorite things to do. And it's based on a 16th century recipe for Wassail, the drink, but I don't include bread in mine. And so just to answer this question kind of in a definitive way for people, For William Shakespeare's lifetime, if you're going to recreate Wassail the drink, would you include bread or would you leave it out?
Well, there's going to be...
Not trying to ask you to pick sides between Max and I guess, but...
Probably, I'm going to say probably yes. What happens with these old customs, I wanted to be sure I got the word muddled into here. Everything gets so muddled. So...
And you're talking about, like a mortar and pestle kind of muddle?
No, I'm actually talking about confused. Everything about these old customs is so confused.
Okay.
Because they have been passed down for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And a lot of times the original meaning gets lost. So I would just venture to say, without any clear answer available, that I'm sure there were households in Shakespeare's time where, yes, you still included that soggy bread.
It's really both. You would make the wassail and then you would dip the bread into it. So probably my recipe was based on the wassail recipe, but adding of the bread would have been separate. So Max and I are on the same history page there. Yes. That's fun to know. Well, for our listeners' sake, what are some 16th or 17th century recipes for wassail that you might have researched in looking up the history behind these songs that you could point us towards of like, well, here's some that say what kind of the ingredients would be for a wassail, the drink?
Okay. So the clearest one that I found, again, was the Max Miller one. Wassail recipes varied quite a bit. Some were cider-based and some were beer or ale-based. However, the one he uses and the one I've seen the reference to the most, if there is any kind of standard recipe, and you think about, say, if you said to a modern person, we're going to have some punch at the reception. Well, that could mean almost anything. It'll probably have certain elements. It'll be cold, it'll be sweet, it'll have fruity stuff in it, it'll probably be bubbly. And after that, there would be, so wassail would be kind of the same thing. However, I'm going to say by the Middle Ages and then on into the Elizabethan period, into Shakespeare's time, there would be a fairly standard base, you might call, of some kind of dark ale. So in Wassail, wassail all over the land, all over the town. If I can sing that, you'll hear it. It's wassail, wassail all over the town. Our bread it is white, and our ale it is brown. Okay, so you've got to have some brown ale if you're going to make yours according to that song, and then your bread. That's your toast, your sop. Okay, so it has the brown ale, the good brown ale, and then it will have spices. And to us, looking at some of the amounts, it's just, to us, it sounds so extreme that it would be almost undrinkable with the amount of spices. But we have to remember, spices were such a symbol of wealth and of celebration. They're just poured into all sorts of things, even savory things. Okay, so you heat up your ale, you have your spices, and then there's also usually some kind of apple or cider element. Now, I've seen two people make this on a video. One was Max Miller, whom we've already discussed, and the other one was Alton Brown, who good eats, and he makes something very, very similar. And so you're basically making applesauce. They both roast the apples in the oven, and then they peel them and they mash them, and then they mix them in with the ale that has been heated up with the spices and sugar. Then they both use brown sugar, which is the closest approximation to the kind of coarse, unrefined sugar they would have had back in the Middle Ages, in Elizabethan times. Before the coming of the sugar trade, then they would have used honey something like that. But
I think in my recipe we used honey.
So that would probably date to earlier than before sugar started becoming available. And of course, if you think about it, sugar would also be very celebratory because it's expensive.
Yes, it's an expensive commodity. See notes on Elizabeth I. Now, with the song that you just sang for us, that snippet, tell us the date that comes from, and then also tell us what were the other songs that were considered wassail songs, because of course we first think of wassail as a drink, but it was also musical. So tell us about some examples of songs from Shakespeare's lifetime that were wassail songs.
Okay, well, as for the date of the song, we don't know, because these are folk songs and they originate and they get passed down for a long time before they're ever written down. So I don't know what date that song was.
But we can say that it was being sung in the 16th century. We just don't know where it started.
Right.
Okay.
And so there's Wassail, Wassail all over the town that I just sang. And then there's Wassail, Wassail. And then there's another song that we don't think of as a wassail song, but it really is. And it's We Wish You a Merry Christmas. And
I know that one. That's fun.
Yes. And then there's Here We Come a-wassailing among the leaves so green. Here we come a-wassailing so fair to be seen. Love and joy come to you, and to you good wassail too. Now, this one, Love and joy come to you. It's obviously being sung to probably a person. And the really intriguing line in that song, which again would have been a folk song, there are many versions of it, but it certainly would have been still being used in Elizabethan times, in Shakespeare's time.
With these songs being so focused on, love and joy come to you and being something, performative, it almost sounds like caroling today, and what we think of people going from house to house and presenting these Christmas songs. And of course, we do have some traditions of wassailing from Shakespeare's lifetime that suggest it was a house to house activity where you were singing in exchange for wassail, perhaps. Tell us about the different kinds of wassailing as an activity. Was it something you would do as caroling, or were there other cultural traditions that would have been known as going wassailing?
Okay. That's such a good question. And that leads to the split in the Wassailing River, if I may put it that way. So there were two main traditions. Now, remember my word muddled. Everything's kind of muddled, and it's very difficult to draw clear, sharp lines. But there was cider wassailing, and that had to do with this tradition of going out into the apple orchards in the fall. And sometimes this tradition was called waking up the trees. And you could do it in one of two ways. You could pour some cider, and this, of course, would be hard cider, from that year's harvest. Now it's been fermented, it's ready to drink. And so you pour some on the roots of the trees. Or, and this is where the toast comes in, you could dip some bread, maybe some hard stale bread that wasn't disintegrate too much, dip it in bread. And then sometimes a woman who was kind of being honored as the queen of the wassail or whatever would be hoisted up into the tree, and she would put this soggy piece of bread in like the branch of a tree, the crotch where the branch comes out from the trunk, and it would kind of stay there. And the idea was, I think everybody listening to this would see the significance of this. You're kind of blessing the trees, you're giving the trees an offering, and you're saying, hey, this is what we want you to produce next year too. And then, of course, you can see how this would be, probably was from the beginning, a party, a celebration. A group of people go out in the orchard, they sing, they brought along lots of cider, some of which gets sprinkled on the trees, but most of which gets consumed by them. So that's the cider wassailing. But then as Christmas comes along and various traditions get associated with that, then you also have what becomes house to house wassailing and what we would now sort of call caroling. So the basic idea is, if you have British listeners, and I'm sure you do, they are familiar with Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, when the master of the estate gave out boxes of gifts, mainly food, to his tenants, and also the tenants. And then in the towns, as the towns start growing up, poorer people can go around and sing in front of the houses of rich people in the hopes that they would be given some food or some money. And the wassailing fits in because they would often bring along, at least in some communities, a great big bowl, the wassail bowl, and in the hopes that the host would ladle in some wassail. Or in some communities, the wassail bowl was being brought by the singers, and they would offer it to the rich man. Here, have some wassail. Oh, and in return, we hope you'll give us some money. So it kind of morphs. House wassailing becomes caroling. And then especially when Cromwell comes along after Charles I, so this is post-Shakespeare, and Cromwell and the Puritans, and they outlaw a lot of these more public intoxication, sometimes verging on violent demonstrations, and everything gets kind of kinder and gentler. And so by the time of the Victorians, caroling was more genteel, at least in some instances, and children start getting involved.
Well, that makes sense that for Shakespeare's lifetime, it would be kind of a wild and raucous event. Yeah.
And trick-or-treating, which is earlier in the year, but is the same idea. You can see echoes of that too. And that could become quite violent. In fact, I kept seeing the words home invasion for those. So things sort of morph along and get less, shall we say, crude, maybe, as time goes on.
That seems fair. Now, one of Shakespeare's references to wassail that I don't understand, and I'm hoping you can clarify for me, shows up in Henry IV Part 2. Shakespeare uses the phrase wassail candle. And I just can't mesh that with the food or the singing. So I'm hoping you will have an answer for, were there specific candles associated with wassailing?
No, that does not seem to be the case. And I meant to have the exact quotation in front of me, and I don't, but I think we both know the lines pretty well. It's Falstaff who's being called a wassail candle. His servant says something to
yes.
Falstaff.
So I have it actually comes from Act 1, and I do have it here, so I'll share it for context. Okay. The Lord Chief Justice looks at Falstaff and says, "What? You are as a candle, the better part burnt out." And Falstaff responds with, "A wassail candle, my lord, all tallow. If I did say wax, my growth would approve the truth." So he's qualifying the insult there and responding to the Lord Chief Justice.
So from what I've been able to figure out, and I'm sure you tried to figure this out too, that is the only reference to a wassail candle anywhere. So it seems to be the case that Falstaff, as you say, is simply saying, well, I'm as fat as a tallow candle, tallow, of course, being beef fat, because I have indulged in so much wassailing.
Well, that would certainly fit with Falstaff. My guess was that they were going house to house with the wassail bowl, and they needed a candle to light their way, and that a tallow candle, because it burns slower, would have been the choice for carrying to do that. But I made that completely up just from what I know about being outside. That's a guess. I don't have historical research to back up that suggestion, but I think mainly what we can tell here is that Falstaff was picking something happy or perhaps even a little bit threatening based on what we know about what wassailing was, to kind of be a comeback to the Lord Chief Justice of, well, you can call me a candle, but I'm this kind of candle. But anyway.
Yeah, I think he's just kind of being, self-deprecating.
Yes, might even be, spicy, saying, I'm a spicy person could have also been sort of what he was saying. Well, wassailing you've mentioned all these different kinds of wassailing that happened, and it was obviously kind of a fluid thing in terms of the ingredients and exactly what you would be doing. But tell us about how it came to be a part of Christmas celebrations. We know that Shakespeare would have celebrated Christmas with wassailing, both the act and the drink, but was it a traditional part of Christmas time for Shakespeare's lifetime?
Well, again, I go back to my muddled theme. So there are all these traditions for this time of year. And then Britain, we'll just stick with Britain, becomes Christianized. And so, of course, there's an enormous amount of controversy, which I won't get into, about is Christmas simply put where it is in the year because of the winter solstice and because of Rome's Saturnalia, all that kind of thing. And so all of these traditions for this dark time of year, and now Christmas has come into the calendar. So if I may use this expression, it's as if Christmas is this big iron bar and all of these iron filings, all of these things that have been going on around that time of year get attracted to Christmas and associated with Christmas, even though they didn't have anything to do with Christmas to begin with. Does that make sense?
It may not have been based in the Christmas tradition of baby Jesus and the Lord's birth and all of that, but it was definitely a time to celebrate. So a lot of the things that were used for celebrations in general got brought out for Christmas time as well, including the wassail. Well, I know that we are excited to explore this history further because you've presented us with a lot to unpack here, and it's fascinating. So if we're new to the history of wassail and the idea of there being a story behind these songs, what are some places that you can point us toward that would be a reliable place to begin when we want to learn more?
Okay, well, I listed, I believe, 4 different sources, which we will put in the show notes. One of them is my own blog post, The Wild and Wacky World of Wassailing. I was quite pleased with that title, in which I attempt to give a somewhat brief overview of all these different strands. I hope, if nothing else, in this podcast, we've shown that there are many, many threads to be pulled together. So that's one. And there are videos in that which give various performances. And then a source that I reference in that blog post that it will tell you more than you ever thought possible about some of the background of this. And it's from a wonderful website called The Hymns and Carols of Christmas. And it's simply called Wassailing. And it's not a book, but it's pages and pages, and they give references to all of these historical sources. And if you are interested in this, I could not give you a better source. It's going to really give you an idea of the richness of all of this. And then I have 2 fun sources. One is the one I already mentioned, the Max Miller video, where you will actually get to watch him make a standard version of wassail, and then he drinks it, and then he tells you what he thinks of it. And to me, it brings across the whole warmth and spiciness, and you're carrying around this big hot bowl while you go around singing. And then I give you a totally for fun source that is not directly about wassailing, but it's about merry old England and old traditions. And it's a murder mystery from the 50s, I believe, 1950s, by one of the queens of crime. Her name is Guyo Marsh. she was in the same category as Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers. She's considered one of the queens of crime. And she actually has a murder mystery in which there's a rather remote village in Britain during the winter, and they are still carrying out some of these very, very old traditions that date back from the Middle Ages, gathering around the bonfire and mummers dancing and all that kind of thing. And of course, drinking wassail would have been part of that. It's not an integral part of the plot. But for some reason, I guess because I was reminded of this with your initial inquiry, and I went back and reread my own post, and I thought, there's that murder mystery that tries to recreate the Middle Ages, and it is so fascinating. So I'm sure, and I used to have long ago, and it's gone with a house downsizing, but there are medieval cookbooks. I used to own a medieval cookbook that will give you all kinds of recipes about this sort of thing. So your options are vast, but those four, especially the first three, I don't know that anybody wants to read a whole detective novel, but the first three sources will give you lots of material. My blog post has links to other information.
These are wonderful resources. And I know I'm always looking for an extra reason to check out a detective novel. So I'll definitely be checking out that book. But these are wonderful resources to help us celebrate the Christmas season with some 16th century wassail and even some demonstrations from the Middle Ages. These are great ideas. And I will link to all of them in the show notes for today's episode. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Now, Debi, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
You know, I found your question quite intriguing because I don't know that I've ever actually thought about it for myself. I've certainly seen it asked of other people, and this is going to sound so cliched, but I would probably go with The Lord of the Rings. I love that book. I probably read it 6 times. Now, if I were on the desert island for 10 years, I'm not sure if I would still feel the same way. But if I had to name a book that I would happily reread, it would be that one.
That sounds like a good selection for your deserted island. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Oh, I am tremendously excited about continuing my website. I am at this point working on posts for our own Christmas concert for the Cherry Creek Chorale, my choir. I also write posts for another choir in the area. We just had a concert in which we sang Mozart's Coronation Mass, and I wrote something fairly short for that I am now going to expand. I am pondering what my next book will be. So I write short posts and sometimes multi-part posts that are available for free publicly on the web. And then I also write books. I've done about a dozen. My first one was on Carmina Burana, Carl Orff's masterpiece. I'm thinking of doing Benjamin Britten's War Mass. I'm not sure that anybody performs it these days, though, but I love that work. I love the texts. And so that may be my next big book-length project. But I am excited right now. We have a concert in which we are singing Hanukkah or other Jewish-related songs. So we have songs in Hebrew. We have a song in Russian. We have a Latin song. And then, of course, we have a few things here and there in English. So it's going to be very fun translating these and giving my readers background.
That sounds absolutely delightful. We will link to Debi's work and these projects in the show notes for today's episode. Debi Simons, thank you so much for being here this week and taking time out of your own Christmas season to help us share some Christmas history with Shakespeare, as well as 16th century England, and to learn more about the surprising place of bread in the making of Wassail. It's been a really fun look at this history, and we appreciate you being here to share it with us. We wish you the very best with your concerts and future projects, and of course, hope you have a very Merry Christmas this year.
And I am so pleased to have been able to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me.
The list of resources and recommendations we've been talking about today that Debi recommends you check out if you want to learn more about Wassailing, the music, you can find all packed into the show notes for today's episode. Find these things at CassidyCash.com/episode 349. If you're an educator in Shakespeare history, don't forget that you can access coordinating classroom content like hands-on history activity kits, worksheets, lesson plans, and even a full syllabus that coordinates with our show by joining as a Shakespeare educator on Patreon. Find these resources right now at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for being here and for listening in this week. I'm Cassidy Cash. From all of us here at That Shakespeare Life, we're sending you good wishes, warmth, and love this holiday season. Merry Christmas! And as always, I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.